between the Philippines and China has long been more than a map of reefs and shipping lanes. It is where law, history, and national interests meet, and where small encounters at sea can become powerful signals on the world stage. In the past 48 hours, that dynamic has returned to the headlines after Philippine authorities said they tracked multiple Chinese research vessels operating near waters Manila regards as part of its exclusive economic zone. The exchanges that followed were immediate, public, and by design visible. At the center of Manila's response is the Philippine Coast Guard and its leader on the water, Admiral Ronnie Gil Gavan, the commandant who oversees the service tasked with enforcing the country's maritime laws, framed the activity as more than a scientific curiosity. He linked the detection of the vessels to a government policy that emphasizes active presence and the protection of Philippine rights at sea, in the strongest language released by the Coast Guard. He made clear what would happen next. Admiral Ronnie Gil Gavan said, "Asterisk, we will not tolerate any illegal marine scientific research conducted without our government's consent. We are deploying aircraft and vessels to challenge and drive away these unauthorized vessels to protect Philippine sovereignty and sovereign rights text principle. Those words matter because they mark a step beyond diplomatic protest." They describe a real kinetic posture, aircraft in the sky, Coast Guard vessels on the move, real-time monitoring of vessels that, according to Philippine officials, were carrying out scientific surveys without Manila's permission. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the coastal state's consent is required for foreign marine scientific research inside its exclusive economic zone. That technical legal rule has become, in practice, a line of sovereignty anyone with an interest in the area watches closely. From Beijing's side, the reaction has been predictable and poignant. Chinese state media and Coast Guard accounts reported a separate incident the same day, an allegation that 5 Philippine personnel landed on a feature Beijing claims in the Spratly chain. Chinese outlets described Coast Guard officers landing, documenting the scene, raising a flag and saying they acted to assert sovereignty. The Chinese narrative, carried in official media, accused the Philippine personnel of an illegal landing and said Chinese law enforcement units handled the incident. That counterclaim, public assertive, and photographed, adds a mirrored layer to Manila's own public posture. These parallel claims, Chinese research vessels operating in waters Manila regards as Philippine, and Philippine personnel accused by Beijing of landing on a disputed feature, are the kind of tit-for-tat exchanges that have defined the South China Sea in recent years. Each side interprets routine activity through a political lens, surveys and sample gathering for one side, sovereign, the tie in law enforcement for the other. To understand the stakes, it helps to step back and look at what the South China Sea represents for all of its claimants. It is a maritime highway for global trade, a source of food for coastal communities, and a region thought to contain hydrocarbons and other seabed resources. For the Philippines, the geographic facts are also legal facts. Its 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, the coastal waters that extend from its coast form the legal basis on which officials insist foreign research must be authorized. That claim is not new. It is grounded in the UN Law of the Sea framework and reinforced in Manila's telling by the 2016 award from an arbitral tribunal in The Hague that rejected broad Chinese historic rights claims in the South China Sea. China has never accepted that ruling. Its insistence on historical entitlements and continued operations across the sea have remained a fundamental point of friction. Science complicates the picture. Because the tools of research are also tools of information. Modern oceanographic ships map seabeds with precision. They deploy acoustic sensors, submersibles, and unmanned systems that can collect data useful for everything from environmental study to undersea infrastructure planning. In contested waters, that same data can be read through a strategic frame, mapping that improves navigation, locating features suitable for future installations, or cataloging environmental conditions in ways that have secondary uses for security planning. For coastal authorities, then, an uninvited research vessel is rarely read as neutral. On the Philippine side, the new posture follows a deliberate policy shift over recent years. Manila has moved from quiet diplomacy and formal protests toward more visible enforcement. Patrols, presence missions, legal challenges, and when necessary, direct operational responses. The Philippine Navy and Coast Guard have both increased patrols in the West Philippines. See? They work alongside agencies that monitor fishing, environmental fishing, and maritime law enforcement. Nearby partners and allies watch too, because an incident in these waters can ripple into wider regional calculations. China's approach has been steady in its own terms. Beijing maintains expansive maritime claims and has invested in regular patrols, law enforcement presence, and a range of civilian and paramilitary activity across the sea. In recent years, that has included a mix of research vessels, Coast Guard cutters, maritime militia, and naval patrols, all presented publicly by Beijing as routine steps to protect territorial integrity and maritime order. When Chinese agencies assert that foreign parties have intruded or that Chinese law enforcement officers have handled incidents, they are making a public case intended to reinforce their claim to jurisdiction and control. The current episode arrives at a time when regional attention is already high. The Philippines eye hosting or participating in exercises with partners. The region is watching alliance activity, capability transfers, and multilateral diplomatic moves. In that context, an incident involving research vessels is easily woven into a larger narrative about alignments, deterrence, and presence. Put differently, a survey ship down on the water can be read as a signal meant to be watched by capitals far beyond the nearest shore. For analysts, the key question is whether this episode is an isolated spike or part of a mounting trend. The answer is largely the latter. Encounters over research activities, fishing operations, patrols, and vessel transits have become more frequent over the past several years. Each interaction is a discrete event, but together they reflect a rising tempo in contested areas. That increases the chance of missteps and miscalculations. A close maneuver, a damaged hull, an aggressive radio exchange can escalate beyond what either side intended. There are practical consequences for Manila if Chinese research platforms operate repeatedly and without consent inside waters the Philippines claims. They can gather long-term data sets, test unmanned or undersea systems, and normalize their presence. That normalization is one of the strategic concerns behind judicial and operational challenges. If detection and challenge are rare, presence becomes de facto control. The Philippine decision to dispatch aircraft and patrol vessels, then, is not merely reactive. It is a statement aimed at preventing a slow slide toward acceptance of ambiguous behavior. There are also environmental and resource angles. Philippine officials have in recent months raised alarms about damage to reefs, incidents involving fishing, and even reports of hazardous materials recovered near contested features. Those points tighten the link between law enforcement and environmental stewardship. When Coast Guards and fisheries departments act, they are protecting not just legal entitlements, but also ecosystems and livelihoods. In diplomatic terms, the Philippines faces a balancing act. It must protect legal rights without escalating into armed conflict, preserve channels of communication with China, and reassure domestic audiences that sovereignty is being defended. That balancing is harder because the South China Sea is at once bilateral, a direct recurring contention between Manila and Beijing, and multilateral because other claimants, outside partners, and global trading interests are all engaged by the outcome. One useful way to think about the immediate risks is to separate intent from outcome. The intent behind a research mission may be scientific or it may be strategic. The intent behind a Philippine patrol may be law enforcement or signaling. Outcomes are shaped by what happens in the water and how each side reads those actions. Clear, consistent communication and established incident management channels can reduce the chance that a routine contact spirals into something else. Without those, every interaction acquires an outsized weight. There are also legal tools still in play. The 2016 arbitral award remains a touchstone for Manila's international argument. Its ruling that much of China's historic claim had no legal basis is invoked by Philippine officials when they demand consent for research or protest incursions. Beijing's long-standing rejection of the award, however, means that legal clarity does not automatically translate to operational compliance in the water. The result is a gap between law and practice that both sides and the region must navigate. Looking ahead, there are a few plausible trajectories. The first is episodic containment. The Philippine Coast Guard undertakes missions to displace the research vessels in question. China reiterates its own notices. Each side records the incident and the immediate tension subsides without wider fallout. The second is gradual normalization. These sorts of encounters become Routine features of the maritime calendar, creating a new contested baseline for operations that both sides accept as the normal friction of the sea. The third and least desirable is escalation, where a series of incidents, miscommunications, or accidents leads to more forceful responses and a broader crisis dynamic. Which path unfolds will depend on decisions in Manila and Beijing, yes, but also on the choices of regional stakeholders and the tone of diplomatic engagement. Channels for immediate communication at sea, formal protocols for boarding and inspection, and third-party confidence building, all of these can lower risk. When governments exercise restraint while preserving rights, they can often prevent routine incidents from escalating into political crises. One immediate reality is that the map of the South China Sea is no longer static. Technology from satellite tracking to dark vessel detection systems to sophisticated survey platforms makes movements visible in ways they were not a decade ago. That transparency can deter some actions, but it also makes every movement a public and therefore political act. When a vessel's position is shared with the public, expectations and reputational pressures shift quickly and decisively. For people who live on the islands and shoals closest to these encounters, the stakes are intensely personal. Fisheries are affected, access to resources changes, and everyday life can be disrupted by a build-up of vessels and patrols. That human angle is sometimes lost in high-level strategic debate, but it is critical. The decisions taken by coast guards and navies have immediate effects on coastal communities. At the same time, the legal framework that Manila invokes remains an essential reference point. If a state proceeds with marine scientific research in another state's EEZ without consent, the coastal state has a basis for challenge under UNCLOS. That legal framework may not resolve the broader political dispute. It won't make China accept the arbitral award, but it does give Manila a formal basis for its enforcement actions and for appealing to international norms. In the near term, expect to see Philippine aircraft and Coast Guard vessels conducting patrols near the tracks where those Chinese research vessels were recorded. Expect Beijing to continue to assert its own version of events and to publish law enforcement actions that, in its language, protect territorial integrity. And expect regional capitals and key partners to watch closely, issue measured statements, and urge restraint. The incident reinforces a broader truth about contested seas. In a crowded strategic space, even activities labeled as scientific carry political weight. What starts on the ocean floor, a sonar sweep, a seabed map, a sample bottle, can become a symbol in a contest over rights and influence. That is why coast guards and navies, diplomats and legal advisors all pay attention when research vessels arrive. Ere their presence is disputed, for now the story is still unfolding. Aircraft have been sent, patrols have been ordered, each side has made its case in public. How they proceed in the days ahead, whether through quiet, de-escalation, negotiated protocols, or sharp exchange, will determine whether this episode becomes a single flashpoint or part of a longer pattern of contested presence in one of the world's most strategically vital seas.